On the morning of the 14th of October 1956, at a mass rally in the Indian city of Nagpur, 400,000 men and women turned their backs on a millennium of degradation and slavery. Finally renouncing Hinduism with its cruel system of graded inequality, they turned instead to Buddhism in search of dignity, hope, and a path to self-improvement. Over the coming months, Hindu India shook as hundreds of thousands more followed their example, and as the Buddha Dhamma came back to life in the land of its birth. The man solely responsible for this historic revival was Dr. Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar, lawyer, politician and educationalist, India's first law minister, chief architect of her constitution and lifelong champion of her downtrodden millions. Born into an oppressed community in village India, where he was deemed unfit to drink water from public wells or to sit with children from higher caste families in the classroom, Dr. Ambedkar's entire career was to become nothing less than an outright challenge to the beliefs and conventions of his society. Now, as that career neared its end, he was embarking on the most controversial and potentially revolutionary step of all, leading his people away from Hinduism to the promised land of Buddhism. Okay, so that's the blurb from the back of this particular book. It's a very good book, actually, called Ambedkar and Buddhism. It's written by Sadaraja, Bhante Sadaraja, as we call him in India, and it's a very, very good overview of the importance and value of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. So in a way, it's a great book actually. One of the reasons it's so good is it's clear about the importance of Babasaheb, why he's so important to India and to Buddhism. And also what's good about the book is Bhante draws on his own experience. He actually knew Ambedkar. He actually met him 3 times and was collaborated with him towards the end of his life, just before the great mass conversion. So it talks about all the different stages of Babasaheb's career, the milestones on the path to the great mass conversion right at the end of his life. So Sadaraja knew him. So it's quite a remarkable book from that point of view. So I'd say it's a great book, actually. I'd say this is really worth reading sometime and getting. I'd say it's a great book, written about one of the great Buddhists of the 20th century, written by one of the great Buddhists of the 20th and 21st century, Sadaraja himself. So, what a remarkable book that is. So what about me? Why am I giving a talk on Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar? Why me? Here I am, a Western Dharmachari from Cumbria in England. Why am I giving a talk on him? Well, the reason is that apparently Subhuti couldn't do it. And Ratnasagara couldn't do it. So they asked me. And, well, I'm honoured indeed, I must say. I'm very honoured to give a talk at any time, in any place, about Dr. Ambedkar, because, my friends, he is one of my heroes. Dr. Ambedkar is definitely one of my spiritual heroes. I've got 4, actually, spiritual heroes, and I'll tell you who they are, actually. The first one, of course, is the Buddha. He's my primary spiritual hero. He's the Buddha, he's the person that started the whole thing in this particular epoch that we're in. The second spiritual hero I've got is Bhante Sadaraja. He's my teacher, and he's had more of an impact on me in the Dharma than anyone else in my life. The third hero is Dr. Ambedkar. So all these 3 are Buddhists, they're in the Buddhist tradition. But I've got a 4th hero, which you might not have heard of, who wasn't actually a Buddhist at all. Not in name anyway, but I do think that he was a Buddhist in his approach. He's called Mahatma Jyotirao Phule. Mahatma Jyotirao Phule. And there's an awful lot I could say about him, and an awful lot I could say about Bhante and of course the Buddha. They deserve a whole series of talks, and there's no time, so I can't do that. But what I will do is I'll answer the question about what I'm doing, giving a talk on Ambedkar. I'll tell you a little bit about my life, just about 5 minutes, something like that. I'll tell you something about that. My own life, well, as was revealed earlier, I am actually 54 years of age. I know you find that very difficult to believe. I'm actually 54. A couple of months ago, I celebrated my 40th anniversary of conversion to Buddhism, if you like. I became a Buddhist when I was 14, which is quite a remarkable thing, really. I don't really quite know how it happened. I think I was probably a Buddhist in my previous life. But there I was in Cumbria. I was born into quite a poor family by British standards. My father was a forester. Forester's kind of quite a grand title. Really, he was a woodman. We lived in a tight cottage. My mother was illiterate. She came from a migrant workers' family. And when for most of her childhood, the family lived in a tent for about 9 months of the year. It was a big tent, canvas tent, and there were fruit pickers and agricultural workers. They only lived in a house for about 3 months of the year. My mother did eventually learn how to read and write, but not till I was well into my teens. So we were quite poor. And back in the 1960s in Britain wasn't kind of how it is now. It was quite different, actually. If you were poor in the 1960s, you were cold. Yeah, if you were poor, you were cold. You were really cold. You often didn't have enough money to heat your house properly. And there's been a lot of concern about that sort of thing in the news recently, in the media. Are people going to be able to heat their homes this winter? Well, that's not a new thing in Britain. However, we were poor, but we weren't cold because my father had wood. We had lots of free wood, so we weren't cold. So religion was Christianity. I had to go to church on Sunday, but I didn't really like it. I didn't believe in God. That was one of the problems. So I stopped going. But when I was 14, I was very lucky to go on a school trip to London. I'd never been to London before, and I saw an image of the Buddha in the British Museum. And I was really, really taken by it. It had a very, very strong effect on me. But I didn't know who it was. And luckily enough, there were some Indian people looking at this statue in the British Museum. So I went up to them. It didn't occur to me to look at the label and read it and see who it was. I went and asked these people, I said, who is that? And they said, oh, it's the Buddha. He's a Hindu god. He's an avatar of Vishnu. That's what they told me. Now, I've been going to India and working in India for many years, and I still hear that actually from people. People will say, oh yeah, Buddhism, that's part of Hinduism. I say it isn't actually. Sometimes I don't bother these days because I've just heard it so often. Anyway, I found out later on that that wasn't actually true. It was the Buddha. He founded a completely separate religion. I was lucky enough to be just happened to be living next to one of the first Buddhist monasteries that got founded in Britain in the 1970s. So I started going there when I was a kid. And, I converted to Buddhism, and the rest, as they say, is history. When I was 23, I met Sadaraja. After a lot of adventures in Buddhism, I met Sadaraja, got involved in our movement, FWBO as it's called then. And a year later I became a Mitra. And a year after that, in 1985 I think it was, quite a big event happened for me. I listened to a talk given by Padmavajra. Some of you might know Padmavajra or have met him. Very, very good speaker, very inspiring speaker. He had just come back from working in India with Lokamitra, and he was talking about this guy I'd never heard of, called Dr. Ambedkar. I'd never heard of him, I didn't know who he was or anything about him. So I heard the story about his life and the mass conversion, and I really sat up. Listening to that talk. I was kind of transported. It was a very big moment for me in my life, my spiritual life. One of the things that I found so different about the talk, because I'd already heard a lot of Dhamma talks by that time, was it was about social change. I'd never heard about the Dhamma actually having a massive effect on society in quite a big way before. Padma was talking about a Dhamma revolution. This was a term I'd never come across before. For me, up to that point, Buddhism was very much about personal change. Changing your life, changing the way your mental states, working on your mind, meditating, practicing the precepts, devoting yourself to the three jewels. I was very familiar with all that. That was still happening, but there was also this whole business of social change. That was quite new. I'd not come across, and I was really excited. I was really excited by that. It really affected me. So from that moment, I started to take an interest in Dr. Ambedkar. I read up about his life, and I was really impressed. How he fought against the injustice of the society that he was working in. I could relate to that. How he applied himself diligently to his studies in the way that he did, particularly coming from the background that he did. He got a few lucky breaks, but he really, really applied himself to his education. I'm afraid I didn't do that with my own education. I didn't have a good education, but also I didn't really apply myself in quite the same way. Also, I was really impressed that Dr. Ambedkar's revolution was a non-violent revolution. That really impressed me. And he really stuck to that. How he lectured intensively, how he uplifted millions and millions of people, and how ultimately he converted to Buddhism and led millions of others to a better life in Buddhism. I was really impressed. So I know that for a lot of you here coming on this day, Dr. Ambedkar is a central inspiration for your life. He could well be the reason that you're actually here today and you're involved in the Dhamma today. So I can't say anything new to you about Dr. Ambedkar. I'm not even going to try. It's all been said, it's all been written for many decades. So I shan't try and do that today. I think what I'm going to do is just tell you about 4 qualities which I particularly admired. And I think there are 4 qualities that Babasaheb can really give to us, gifts if you like, that he can really give to us practicing here in the West. And that's what I'm going to talk about now. So it's quite a personal talk, really. Babasaheb had scores of qualities. Just watching the video earlier, the 20-minute video, we can see some of the qualities that he had. Recently voted the greatest Indian by the Indian population. So many qualities. He probably had hundreds, but I particularly focused on 4, which have impressed me. And the first of these is courage. Babasaheb showed courage. It's a great, great quality. Courage is such an important quality. Yeah, I've got a little dictionary definition. The mental state that allows you to rise above limitations of fear or disapproval or resistances of any kind to achieve your aim. So that's courage. So it is a great quality, and there are times in life where no other quality will do. It has to be courage. Yeah? Particularly when there are many, many people, the group is against you. Sometimes in life, the group is right and the individual is wrong. It's not right. Sometimes in life, the group is wrong and the individual is right. And Sadaraja tells us that the group can be the school or the university, it can be the family, it can be the community, it can be the society, it might even be the nation or the caste. And in Dr. Ambedkar's case, there were millions of people who were against him from the moment he was born. he was born into the Mahar caste, and it wasn't a great start for him. And all these people were against him. There's a lot of prejudice, social prejudice, that he encountered. He received beatings when he was a kid if he didn't stick to the rules. Dr. Ambedkar had the courage to stand up against all that. And amazingly, he survived. He wasn't killed. It's a remarkable thing that he did. In his case, he was assigned to very limited kinds of work. The caste that he came from, he was assigned a particular approach to life, and he wasn't happy with that. There was much more to him than what was assigned to him. So he had the courage to speak out against those limitations, and he changed things. This was the amazing thing. He wrote, he educated himself, and he wrote, and he used his influence, and he changed Indian society forever. He challenged the status quo, and as I say, he survived, which is a remarkable thing. So, a few years ago, I was in India at the 50th anniversary of Dr. Ambedkar's Diksha Bhumi. I was in Nagpur, 2006, and I went to a gathering of 1.5 million people. 1.5 million people. I was in the middle of it all. And I got talking to a very old man who could speak very good English. And he was there at the conversion in 1956. And he said it was fantastic. He said instantly we were released from hell. That's how he described it. He said our lives were like hell before the conversion. He said, and immediately afterwards things started to change and improve. So this was all due to the courage of Babasaheb. But all the way through his life, there are all sorts of incidents where he showed this courage. We saw one on the video earlier of the Chowder tank incident, where a tank in India is a big lake. He actually went to and drank from this lake, which was a really, really shocking thing to do at the time. He burned the Manu Smriti. He actually burned it publicly. And again, he survived. It took enormous courage to do those things. So all his life, he struggled with challenging and dangerous conditions. And he fought the injustice that he saw. He wrote and published and got things changed. And in this way, I think he was carrying on the work of Mahatma Phule, who was a great social reformer in India in the Victorian times. And he was very much a guru of Ambedkar, one of his great inspirations. So Dr. Ambedkar wasn't frightened by the bullies of his society. He wasn't frightened by politics. He wasn't daunted by the massive work of framing the Indian Constitution. And right at the end of his life, he showed the enormous courage to convert to Buddhism and lead his people into Buddhism. It's a remarkable thing that he did. He also, right at the very end of his life, he published this book, The Buddha and His Dhamma, which is a kind of Buddhist Bible in India. For a lot of Buddhists, it's the only book that they can own on Buddhism, they can afford to own. And it's often free in India, thankfully. And when he died, they found him, he was slumped over the final drafts of the book on his desk, dead. I mean, what a remarkable man. So very, very dedicated, very, very courageous. So I think you and I, we can take inspiration from his courage, because there will be times in our own lives, probably in much smaller ways, but we have to face difficult and challenging situations. Sometimes it might be an illness. It might be financial difficulties or work difficulties. It might be spiritual difficulties that we're working with, that we're upset about, that we're frightened of, that we might have to say the unpopular thing sometimes that needs to be said. I often find myself in this position, working in a right lively business. Sometimes have to say something unpopular, which has to be said. The only quality that you can really utilise at that time is courage. So the source of Dr. Ambedkar's courage is reflected in the following quote. My social philosophy may be said to be enshrined in 3 words: liberty, equality and fraternity. My philosophy has roots in religion and not in political science. I have derived them from the teachings of my master, the Buddha. So the second quality I'd like to talk about is Dr. Ambedkar's discipline. Dr. Ambedkar was a very disciplined man. And when I was a young man, discipline was a bit of a dirty word. It was not a very popular word. It probably still isn't, actually, for a lot of people. Discipline was sort of associated with controlling people or with the sort of military, that kind of thing. It was all about, that's what discipline was. When I was 16, I joined the police force, and we had to learn discipline. And I didn't really like it, actually. I shouldn't have joined anyway in the first place, but anyway, that's another story. But yeah, discipline wasn't a very popular thing, and it still isn't for a lot of people. Because it sort of tends to suggest limitation of some kind, narrowness being forced into a particular way of life or habits. But actually, discipline is a very, very useful thing in life. And Babasaheb showed that in his own life. It's a very useful faculty to have. If you want to get a good job, if you want to study for exams, you've got to be disciplined. You've got to be disciplined with your studies, with your personal habits. If you don't want to get into debt and you want to save money, you've got to be disciplined. If you want to stop overeating, you need to be disciplined. You have to learn discipline to make a success and have a happy life. And of course, if you want to have an effective spiritual practice, you want to meditate on a regular basis and practice the precepts and go on retreat, you need to be disciplined. You need to have a discipline in your spiritual practice. It won't work otherwise. It'll all be very haphazard and you won't really make much progress. I don't think, though I became a Buddhist when I was 14, I don't think I made any real progress with it, much progress, until I encountered Bhante Sadaraja at age 23. I started to make really quick progress then because he was suggesting to me that I became more disciplined. He did it in a very nice way, actually. Very nice way, but it's all very English, and perhaps you could be a bit more disciplined, you know. And he was right. He was really right. If you don't do that, life will just take over, won't it? Life will take over, and things won't really happen. You won't make much progress. So Babasaheb showed that quality all through his life. Yet, getting up early to study. He was a barrister. He trained to be a barrister at Gray's Inn in London. He wrote his papers. He travelled. He lectured. You know, he wrote the Indian Constitution. In India, all children, everywhere throughout India, know the first 85 words of the Indian Constitution, the introduction. They all know it. Everybody knows it. And on Republic Day, they're there, sort of saluting the flag. Everybody feels a connection with that Constitution. He wrote that. And he was also very disciplined in his personal habits. And that way, he got a lot achieved. And look at what he achieved. It's incredible. Also, in the last 4 years of his life, he was very disciplined in the daily practice of meditation. And this has been quite well documented. In fact, he's quoted as saying, "Without meditation, I would be dead." Now, I don't know what he actually meant by that, but I can imagine. Meditation towards the end of his life became very important. So a very, very disciplined man, a great scholar, a powerful speaker, an effective statesman, an astute politician, a true human being. Yeah? And as we heard on the video, probably the most qualified Indian ever. And, you know, one of the great Buddhists of the 20th century. So all that came out of his discipline. And I think, for me, I need discipline. For you, probably you will need discipline in your life as well. If you're going to have regular meditation, you're going to practice the precepts, you're going to experience effective spiritual friendship, and you're going to study and reflect on the Dharma, you need discipline. It's as simple as that. Because modern life is more demanding than in the time of Dr. Ambedkar, much more demanding. You know, there are so many distractions and superficialities. I was talking to somebody the other day and I said, how many means of communication do you actually have at your disposal? And he said, well, there's tweeting, there's mobiles, texting, Facebook, emailing, there were a whole lot of other things. And I said, what else have you got? He said, I've got an iPad, an iPhone, an iPlayer, a Kindle, an e-book. Can't quite read my own. Oh yeah, widescreen television. Yeah, he's got all that. But he was finding it difficult to get his meditation going. And I thought, well, perhaps you could do without one or two of them, you know. So yeah, you know, we need discipline, don't we, in our lives? Otherwise, we will be swamped by the sea of distraction that pervades modern life. And I've noticed that's happening in India in the same way. More and more people are getting swamped in that kind of way. So I think discipline is obviously a quality of the mind, and that's reflected in one of Babasaheb's quotes, where he says, cultivation of mind should be the ultimate aim of human existence. The third quality I'm inspired by in relation to Babasaheb is clarity. Babasaheb was clear. Clarity, once again, is such an important quality in the Sangha. We have to have it. If we're going to become a true human being, if we're going to practice the Dharma effectively, we need clarity. We need to be able to understand concepts and ideas. And concepts, for instance, like Prachita Samudpada or conditioned co-production. Yeah, the sort of central doctrine of Buddhism. We need to, it's quite subtle actually, to try and understand it. We have to think about it and get clear about what that is. Yeah? As I said earlier, my own education wasn't very good in my childhood. So I've had to make quite an effort as an adult to educate myself so that I can understand concepts, and particularly the subtlety sometimes of Buddhist concepts. So for instance, the difference between Hindu rebirth or Hindu reincarnation, I should say, and Buddhist rebirth. Yeah, what's the difference? Well, Dr. Ambedkar knew what that was. Yeah, we need to know what the difference is if we're going to practice the Dharma in an effective way. There's a subtle difference, but there's a real and important difference. So we need to be clear about that kind of thing. Also, we just need to be clear of whether something is true or whether it is false in this life. Yeah? We need to move away from confusion. The world, as they say, is full of fools. The world is full of fools. We don't need any more fools in this world. Yeah? They say that, there's a saying we have in England sometimes, we say, a fool and his money are easily separated. A fool and his money are easily separated. And you could even say that a fool and his wisdom are always separated. Yeah, without wisdom, without clarity, we're not going to make progress, we're not going to be able to understand the world, we're not going to be able to understand the Dhamma. So, within the Sangha, within the Buddhist community, people are often confused about their own spiritual experiences. Sometimes they have very strong, very powerful spiritual experiences, perhaps in meditation, and they think, woo, perhaps I'm a bodhisattva. Perhaps I've entered the stream. I need to tell people about that. Perhaps I'm a once returner. Or even perhaps, as somebody said to me a couple of years ago, I'm God. And I said, we don't have gods in Buddhism. We don't have a God anyway. But in reality, I think people are often very confused. That's what's going on. They're confused. Or they're fantasizing. And Babasaheb wasn't like this. He was very clear about what he wasn't and what he was. He was clear about his purpose and his path, which was a path of wisdom and a path of compassion. He led an ethical life, and he saw what was true and what was false, and he wasn't afraid to say what that is. He would definitely say that to you, whoever you were. And there's some examples from the life of Sadaraja when he met Babasaheb, and he experienced some of that with him. He was pretty strong. So Babasaheb showed clarity in his life, and it was like he was holding up a big torch in the middle of the caves of Baja, as you showed us earlier, in a dark cave, and he was lighting it all up with his clarity. He was so progressive. And of course he saw inequality in India, and he saw that that was wrong, and he wanted to change it. And he particularly showed clarity in choosing Buddhism and to convert to Buddhism and to lead his people into that. He spent many, many years actually surveying in depth all the world's religions. He really tried them all out, how to look. And in the end he decided that Buddhism was the best religion for him to convert to. And that's what he did. So I think it's a great quality, and you and I, we need clarity in our own lives, because, as I said earlier, the world is very, very confusing. Yeah, it's very hard to understand what's going on in the world very often. Politicians and statesmen often are presenting us kind of simplistic Blue Peter solutions to very, very complex problems in our society. We need to really understand what the world is, and we need to understand the Dhamma if we're going to act skillfully and act in the right way. I think Sadaraja showed a lot of clarity himself. Shortly after Babasaheb's tragic death, he died suddenly, straight 6 weeks after the conversion. A terrible thing to happen. Millions of people were in a state of despair. He knew he had to get to Nagpur. He had to get there. And he didn't know what was going to happen, but he had to get there. And he got there, and he saw what was happening, and he stood on top of a rickshaw with the Dikshabuni in front of hundreds of thousands of people. And he lectured, and he calmed them down, and he helped them to move on. He then spent weeks in Nagpur giving many talks a day. I mean, I'm just giving one little talk here and now. But he gave many talks a day to people, reassuring people, saying that Babasaheb would live on in their hearts and in the teachings. So he showed a lot of clarity. He knew what to do. He knew what the right thing was at that time. Such a good quality. Babasaheb also had clarity around the Indian constitution and where that needed to go. He understood the Indian way of life probably better than most people. So when he wrote that constitution, and Gandhi asked him to write it, he was very clear about the democracy, which is the path that India has taken since then. So I'm very inspired by this. And I think it's borne out, this clarity is borne out in another short little quote from Babasaheb. A great man is different from an eminent one in that he is ready to be the servant of society. He was very definitely a servant. So fourthly and lastly, I'm inspired by the vision of Babasaheb. If you've got vision, it means that you can see. It means you can see with your eyes. That's what vision is. But also there's another kind of vision. There's a vision with the heart, or the mind, the inner vision, where you actually see how things really could be, how they could be better than what they are at the moment. And it requires imagination. Babasaheb had stacks of imagination. He really had it in abundance. As a young man, he had a vision for his own life. He wasn't going to be restricted by the Maha way of life. No way. He wasn't going to stick with that. There was much more potential in him than that. He had a vision for India as well, and where that could go. And look at what's happened. And of course he had a vision for the Dhamma, for its growth in India and the rest of the world. So his vision was one of dignity and respect for everyone, opportunity for everyone, education for everyone, and spiritual growth. And it wasn't just for Buddhists that he had that vision. It was for the whole of India, actually. He wasn't just restricted to Buddhists. It was everyone. And I'm sure it wasn't restricted to India as well. It was probably, it was a vision for the world. So I think he's an important person in relation to the world, actually, not just India. But he did have a vision for the path of the Buddha. And this was wisdom and compassion. And he had both of these things. And he was so progressive. I've seen a lot of the results of Babasaheb's vision in my own work in India, running retreats in India. I've seen the work of TBMSG, Triratna in India. And it's remarkable the hundreds and thousands of people, their lives, how it's been affected as a result of Babasaheb's vision. And in a very small way, I participated in some of that. But over and over again, I'm struck by how progressive his vision was. So for instance, he said, I measure the progress of a community by the degree of progress women have achieved. So he had this vision for women in society, because India was, and to some extent still is, unfortunately, quite an unequal society. And he really helped to change that and improve that. And I thought that was very, very progressive. So India is a democracy, the world's largest democracy, and a lot of that is a result of his vision. It's not as good and as complete as he would have liked it to be. India's got a long way to go yet. But look at what's been achieved. Look at what's come true of Babasaheb's vision. And in relation to the Dhamma, it's also really growing and developing. I just had a little look at the map the other day at just how many Triratna centres and projects we've got going in India. We've got activities in Agra, Amravati, Ahmedabad, Aurangabad, Gurgaon, Goa, Kolhapur, Dapoli, Hyderabad, Nagpur, Pimpri, Pune, Hastinapur, Mumbai, Baja, Dapoli, Latur, Warada, Sholapur, Thane and Nanded, Yerrawada and Ulhasnagar. And probably quite a few more I haven't mentioned there. There's so much going on. Real people in real situations benefiting from the Dhamma. And it's not just TBMSG, Triratna. There are other Buddhist organisations also doing very, very good work in India who all look to Babasaheb for their inspiration. But there's so much more work to do. There's work for many lifetimes, I think. But his crowning achievement was the vision for the Dhamma in India. So his conversion wasn't just some kind of political stunt that he did. It was a really intelligent, visionary conversion. It was a real conversion in the full sense. And that's borne out in what's called the 22 vows that people recited. I'm not going to read them all out now because they're quite long, but it's very, very specific, the 22 vows that Buddhists took at that conversion, which spells it all out. And for me, Babasaheb's vision is encapsulated in this short quote. The teachings of the Buddha are eternal, but even the Buddha did not proclaim them to be infallible. The religion of Buddha has the capacity to change according to times, a quality which no other religion can claim to have. Now, what is the basis of Buddhism? If you study carefully, you will see that Buddhism is based on reason. There is an element of flexibility inherent in it, which is not found in any other religion. So much then for these four qualities of Babasaheb. As I say, they're just 4 qualities amongst probably 100 that I could talk about. But what a difference. Courage, clarity, discipline and vision, what a difference they make to the lives of so many of us. And as we saw earlier, he was voted the greatest Indian recently. And I sometimes see these 4 qualities as like gifts that he's giving to us. He's giving us those gifts to us in the Buddhist world. So I think there's something that we can receive and benefit from in the Western Sangha from Babasaheb. Babasaheb's not the only teacher, Buddhist teacher, to come up with courage, discipline, clarity and vision. Many, many other people have exhibited these qualities. But I personally think he's a very, very prominent example that we can draw upon. So personally, I consider myself to be a disciple of Babasaheb. He's definitely my teacher. He's definitely part of my spiritual lineage. I'm a member of the order, and Babasaheb is definitely a teacher as far as I'm concerned, along with Bhante Sangharakshita, the Buddha, and my preceptor Subhuti. So I feel that in Triratna we're doing the work of Babasaheb. We're doing his work. Maybe we're certainly doing it in India, and we are doing it, I definitely think we're doing it here, but not everyone will know about Babasaheb, and I think it would be a really good thing if more and more people in the Buddhist world knew about Babasaheb. So next year, I have a vision for a much bigger festival that we have here in Cambridge and in other Buddhist centres to celebrate his life and work. There are so many skillful qualities that he exhibited that we can learn from. But of course, with all this skillfulness, all these merits and qualities, there are still 1 or 2 dangers. And I'm just going to say a little bit about those before I close. So I'm about to go to India in February, and for a month, and one of the things I often feel visiting the work of TBM in India, seeing their hostels, their charities, their centres, their retreat centres, meeting the Sangha, just like Arya Varching was saying earlier, it's very inspiring. But one of the dangers, I think, with such a great wave of Buddhism occurring in that way is complacency. Waves are very interesting things. If you actually watch a wave, it can carry you along the wave, and you can ride along that wave. And it can really feel like that when you're in a big Sangha. You can just go along to a festival and you can ride along on a big wave of Buddham, Saranam, Gacchami, and there you are, and you're just chanting away, you feel so good, all these really positive, shining people in their lives. That's what it can feel like. And it's the same here, it's the same in the West, particularly if you come along to the Sangha Day Festival, which is probably the biggest that we have. It's stuffed full of people, and you feel, oh yeah, Buddhism's great, isn't it? And I can just sort of ride along on that, if you like. A few years ago, I was literally riding on a wave. I've got a big inflatable canoe, and I took it out onto the sea with my friend Gukyavadra. It's a double canoe, and we went out on Wells next to the sea, if you know where that is, and we set off from the beach, and it was reasonably calm when we set off, and we probably went about a mile out to sea in this canoe too, and it started getting really rough. And the boat was filling full of water. It's an inflatable boat, so it stayed afloat. And Gukyavadra said, we need to get back, something bad's going to... So we turned the canoe back, and this big wave came along and took us all the way to the shore, where it then dumped us in the water like this. And we were all on top of us. And these little kids with their parents will always say, what are those guys doing? We felt real fools on this set. Two men in their 50s. We felt real twits. But yeah, we were carried along by a wave and then we were dumped. And that's kind of what can happen if you don't make an effort. Yeah, if you just ride the wave, you can end up getting dumped. If you forget to meditate regularly, if you forget to practice the precepts or go on retreat, yeah, if you're reluctant to give dana, yeah, if you forget the message of the Buddha, yeah, you can come along to Babasaheb's Revolution, Dhamma Revolution Day, you can ride that, but what about the rest of the year? You can forget the gifts that he gave and the effort that he made, that we're riding on. You end up going for refuge to Bollywood movies and to gossip and all these sorts of things. That's what can happen. Yeah, Bhante Sangha actually calls it the gravitational pull. It can pull you down. This is what can happen. So Babasaheb's life is a reminder to me and to you to remember the middle way. Remember the middle way of effort. You need to make an effort in spiritual life. If your life is not going to descend into just an ordinary, very superficial life, where you're just concerned about money and status and property, and that's all your life is. If we're not going to descend, we have to practice the middle way. Middle way between self-harm on one hand and self-indulgence on the other. Making enough effort, not making enough effort, I should say, or making too much effort. Crazy effort and lazy effort. They're the extremes. We have to find the middle way. And when we find that middle way of the right kind of effort, it will feel right. Yeah, we'll be effectively practicing. We will know when that's happened. The image that the Buddha gave for that middle way was like lute strings. Lute strings, when they're exactly the right tightness, they're not too tight, they're not too slack. Yeah, they produce beautiful music. Quite a few times in India I've been to sitar concerts. Sitar concert. I never saw Ravi Shankar, unfortunately, but I've seen some really fine players, and their sitar strings were just exactly right. The music was incredibly beautiful. So that's what we have to do. We have to get our sitar strings right in terms of our effort. And we can use courage and discipline and clarity and vision to help us to practice that middle way. And if we do that, victory will be ours. And it will be the victory of the Buddha, the victory of the Dhamma, the victory of the Sangha. It will be the victory of Triratna and the victory of Bhante Sangha. It will also be the victory of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. Jai Bhim.